President Obama from having any victories, and yet this is a president that has passed affordable health care, has gotten Osama bin Laden, has passed LGBT equality laws that are unbelievable, and has brought unemployment down from 10 to 5%. But there is so much more to be done, and that's why you're here tonight, because you know that too. What I bring to this race is experience, 40 years here in Washington, raising my family here. First of all, as a journalist, who wasn't just sitting behind the anchor desk. I was actually out in the streets, in your communities, covering crime, covering your schools, covering your workplaces. And my Working Woman show profiled, for many of you, the struggles, but also the incredible advancements of women and the successes of women. In fact, I profiled Jamie Raskin's mom on my TV show. I was also a woman in business, working just up the street here up Old Georgetown Road at Marriott International, which is one of the largest employers here in Maryland and in Montgomery County. And I wasn't just sitting quietly in my desk there either. I was agitating to bring women up to the top of that company, agitating to advance minorities, the LGBT equality, and the environment. All the while being a working mom, raising my own kids, struggling, working nights, weekends, trying to get daycare, helping my mother who was dying, who was getting treatment at NIH. So I know the struggles of working families. I've lived those struggles with you, with all of you here in the room. And this is why I'm running. I'm running on an opportunity agenda. I want to be working for women, not just the working woman, but working for women and families when it comes to getting an economy that works better for all people, safer communities with smart gun legislation, and also protecting our planet for future generations. And I look forward to the conversation tonight.
All right, now we get down to the questions. This first question, we will start with Mr. Rubin. In light of the recent tragic events in Paris, it is reported that ISIS intends to strike Washington, D.C. Do you agree with the President's decision to intervene in Syria, and how should the U.S. respond to ISIS?
Thanks, Kate. It's heartbreaking to watch what's happening in Syria. 10 million refugees coming out, and I'd like to echo that it's shameful today that Governor Hogan stated that he would not accept refugees from Syria. This is a moral outrage. We're a country that should accept people who are fleeing this violence, and we should be engaged. This violence has got to stop, and that's the core, and that's where the administration is trying to go. And my work in Congress as a staffer, my work at the State Department, we work very closely with all of the key players in the executive branch and across Congress and internationally to look at this. And I have to say, at the end of the day, it's a humanitarian crisis that we as a country can address and we should address. And we also need to make sure that we're engaging smartly overseas with our military. We cannot get into another quagmire. We cannot send major troops into Syria. We have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that keeps our troops secure, that helps secure that country, and works with our allies in the region and globally to make sure that those people in Syria have a better life.
Thank you. So, a reminder, this should be 1 minute, and we'll give Neil Carter 30 seconds left. All right. Thank you. Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Same question to you.
Well, the recent terrorism is horrible in France. I need to tell you that I am the only candidate on this stage who was opposed to the Iran nuclear deal. And that was because I was very concerned about the money that would be channeled into terrorist activity. And these are different terrorists, ISIS, but the concern of terrorism is first and foremost for me. We need to work with a broad coalition to continue to fight ISIS, not only in Syria, but in Iraq. We should not declare war on ISIS because that would actually legitimate them. That's what they want. They want the West to declare war on them. So we must continue to fight them. We must also try and eliminate the funding, the streams of funding that are coming from Saudi Arabia and Qatar to promote ISIS. And we do have to work with a coalition to try and create a new government in Syria as we are simultaneously trying to take down ISIS.
Candidates, we have had a request, or several requests, that you stand up as you speak. So, thank you, audience, for your input here. There is the portable mic that you can use right there. See if that's easier.
Thank you very much. Well, to begin with, I do not believe we should put boots on the ground in the Middle East, and I do not believe we should allow terrorist actions like this to be an excuse to discriminate against people in the United States. We clearly have to work forcefully with our allies, especially the State of Israel in the Middle East. But let's not forget the reason this is a problem to begin with was because of the ill-conceived war against Iraq in the first place. A war where we spent $800 billion, half of which we borrowed from China, and it was completely unnecessary. We need to work closely with our allies. We need to work on the intelligence in this, and I believe we can, over a number of years, months actually, we can solve this problem.
Thank you. Thank you. The most recent events that we've seen in Paris and all the violence that we saw occurring in Beirut, Baghdad, in Egypt, all of this to me is pointing to the most serious acts of terrorism that are now throughout the world. This is not just Paris. This is not isolated. It can happen here. It can happen throughout the world. I think we must have a collective view, a global view, to make sure that we control this horrible violence, this incredible attack on humanity. I believe the United States should join the forces of all that are available through NATO and through the United Nations. This is the time when we must come together. This is why we are signatories to these agreements. I believe there is nothing really more important right now in foreign policy than to fight ISIS. That's so short.
So when our kids were little, we lived in Paris for a year, not far from where the terror attacks were. And this is an attack not just on Paris and on France, but on democracy and on civilization itself. ISIS is a terrorist death cult that has set itself at war against all civilization. And our job now, and I should say I agree totally with Kumar, I marched against the Iraq war. I introduced a resolution which passed in the state Senate against the Iraq war, but we are where we are now. And we have to organize the whole world as if the whole world was NATO to attack this death cult which will commit violence and terror against people across the world. And we've got to let the refugees in. That's for real. We're just talking 10,000 people. Germany's taking 1 million people. It's obscene what the governors are saying, including our governor is saying right now. Do you know that it takes 12 to 18 months before you even get through the most meticulous vetting process on earth for refugees? And they're saying that they don't want them. So let's let them in.
That we have just learned in the last 2 weeks that ISIS, the Islamic State, has designs to project its power and its terror beyond Syria and Iraq and into a global war. And this is a threat that now eclipses Al-Qaeda, which took down our towers in Pentagon on 9/11. And so we have to be very deliberate in how we approach this. We've got to be careful. We cannot let ourselves be pulled into a war the way we did in Iraq. But we have to create alliances that enable us to put Al-Qaeda and put ISIS out of business. We've got to go in there and we've got to bomb their sanctuaries, as the President and the French have been doing. We've got to share intelligence between our allies so we make sure we all know what is going on. We've got to protect this country, but protecting this country does not mean keeping Syrians out. As Jamie said, these people are vetted over a 2-year period of time before they're let into this country. And so these are not the same people that are showing up in boats in Europe. These are people going through a very deliberate immigration and refugee process.
Thank you.
And
That's always happened to me. Thank you, Anna. Don't start. I didn't get to mention on the experience front, because we had those timing issues, I've worked in government, in the federal government, which is an important point in this race. 6 years in the House for Nancy Pelosi. With Barack Obama was the senator, with Sherrod Brown, he's a senator, also worked in the White House, Obama White House for 2 years, as well as the Department of Education. You need someone in this seat who understands how the federal government works. And we'll talk more about that later. I would agree with much of what is said. I'd add 2 points. We have 2 paths forward on this ISIS issue. We can go it alone like we did in Iraq, and we've seen the consequences, the dramatic loss of life, the loss of respect in the world that's happened, or we can build the biggest coalition possible and go in together. And I'm in that camp. I think that's the only way we think about putting boots on the ground. I'm not there yet because we haven't built enough of that coalition, if we are to consider that. We have seen a degradation in their forces. 25% of the territory that ISIS has occupied has been reduced because of the airstrikes. They are working. I agree with the president on that point. We need to keep doing that. But we will not put boots on the ground unless it's in a coalition. I was in Washington in 2001 when those planes were coming, and I know how it feels. Thank you.
We'll start this next question with Mr. Anderson. Women and minorities continue to face obstacles, including employment discrimination, pay equity, lack of paid sick and family leave, achievement and opportunity gaps, and treatment by the criminal justice system, to name a few. How would you represent the interest of women and minorities in Congress, and on what issues might you take a leadership role?
Well, I'm going to come back to the issue I was talking about before. I think that there's a bias, basically, among the lead candidates in this race, and it goes right up to the top of the Democratic Party. Basically, we support paid leave and child care, and that's because we're supporting working women. I also think we need to support stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads. We need to give an option. And if you don't provide the option, you're basically denying people the right to raise their own children and get a tax credit for it. You see, years ago, we tried to get women rights and get them into the workforce, and that was great because we were denying working women rights. Now, we're denying the stay-at-home parents' rights, and that includes in LGBT families. This is the dominant conflict in the American middle class. We need to support both approaches. Otherwise, you stigmatize the stay-at-home mom or the stay-at-home dad.
Thank you. I believe that all of us here probably support raising the minimum wage, indexing it to the rate of inflation, having equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender, and a week of paid sick leave. But let me talk specifically about something I never hear about on the campaign trail. Women live longer than men, and we have to specifically take that into account when we do the math concerning retirement, concerning pensions. We have to understand the different needs that women have in healthcare. We have to make sure that our healthcare system accounts for all of this at the national level. It is, I will just mention one last thing, and that is when we were getting rid of the pre-existing condition limitation, along with Delegate Burson, I stood up to say we shouldn't allow insurance companies to charge women more in premiums than men. It would have been wrong and discriminatory, and I'm glad we stopped it then. We should never allow that kind of discrimination against women in the future.
Thank you. The question is, what will we do to represent women and families in Congress? Well, I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing now. I've been doing 14 years of real hard fighting for representing the interests of women. I am known as a fighter. People don't want to really take me on because when I am going to defend an issue, and I've been defending women's issues, promoting women's issues throughout my public life. I'm a member of the Women's Caucus, and the Women's Caucus has been incredible at ensuring that we are passing legislation that is in support of women. But I'm not going to stay with the status quo. I find that women are often given the short end of the stick. Our issues are dismissed many times by leadership. In this year, when we passed the minimum wage increase, we had an opportunity to address tip workers. Tip workers are women. I'll be back.
Thank you. Let's see. One of the first bills I introduced was the Lilly Ledbetter Act to overturn a ridiculous decision by the Supreme Court, which said that a woman who found out that she'd been discriminated against for 30 years couldn't file an action because she hadn't filed within 180 days, but she didn't know about it until 30 years later. So we were able to change this ridiculous rule on the statute of limitations. I am often the first on my feet when the Republicans try to delete Medicaid funding for abortions. It just happened in February. It's easy for people to say they're pro-choice. Are you willing to go to the mats to defend Medicaid funding for abortions for poor women? Because that's where the action is today. They're trying to make it impossible for poor women to get the health care that wealthier women have access to. I introduced legislation when I first got into the Senate to guarantee, for the first time in Maryland's history, the right to a jury trial in a civil rights job discrimination case for women and minorities. Before you'd have to go before an administrative tribunal. Is that really 60 seconds? That's unbelievable.
I believe that when you raise women's voices, you raise women's choices. It's as simple as that. We have too few women in our legislatures, in our Congress. Our U.S. Congress is fewer than 1 in 5 women right now. And a new study that Anne-Marie Slaughter cites in her new book shows that when legislatures become more than 40% female, all of the legislation we've been talking about here today gets passed. Minimum wages go up, equal pay for equal work, paid benefit and sick leave. I got a plan, it's on my website, it's all there. Please go to KathleenMatthewsforCongress.com.
Keep passing the mic.
Thank you. The question was, how do you support and what have you done for women and people of color and minorities in this country? I have a strong working wife who has now joined us, who's a vice president at the Center for American Progress, working on a lot of these issues. Michelle, thank you for coming. We have three daughters that we're taking care of, making sure that they have the opportunities that others didn't have. I was able to pass and work on the passage of, rather, the Lilly Ledbetter Act at the federal level. Again, we're talking about Congress here. When I worked in the White House, the first bill that President Obama was able to pass, I coordinated working groups and children and families groups around that legislation. I think for people of color, there's a lot we need to do. To Kathleen's point, 90% of people in Congress are white men, 90%. I know from sitting at the Health Committee, the Senate Education Committee, as the only person of color in the room, when I spoke up and talked about the importance of TRIO programs that help low-income kids get to and through college, that telling my story mattered. It changed the conversation. The important issue in this race will be who can change the conversation in Congress, who can build the coalitions necessary to get that done, and I'm that candidate.
So it makes two of us. As the father of 3 wonderful girls and one of 6 in my house, being the only male, I'm living with my mother-in-law, and that's right. And it's wonderful. I have to say, she has more than pulled her fair share, and really that's what it's about. Multi-generational commitment that we have to my mother-in-law, to all of our elders, to our children. But we have a commitment to ensure that what the children are getting next is better than what we're getting now. We need to make sure this economy works for everyone, not just for the wealthy and the CEOs. This economy has to work for our children, and it has to empower them to be able to support us in the way that fortunately we're able to support my mother-in-law. Thank you.
Yes, we will start this next question with Delegate Barbe. Congress has recently attempted to pass comprehensive immigration reform, but it has not yet succeeded. Do you agree that our immigration policy should be revised, and if so, what aspects must change, and how would you build bipartisan support for that change?
Yes, our immigration policies do have to be changed, and speaking as a grandchild and child of an immigrant, it was a much easier path for my father than it was for my grandfather, and it needs to be a more logical and humane path for people who are right now working in our economy, often in low-skilled wages, low-wage skilled jobs. They don't have the ability to negotiate on their own behalf. The lack of citizenship hobbles their ability to be true, actualized people in our economy. We need to have a path to citizenship for all of these hard-working immigrants. We need to build a coalition between labor, the faith community, and the Chamber of Commerce, because let me tell you, the fact of the matter is the majority of the American people believe in this humane and economically extremely sensible solution. I'll leave you with one final thought here. Not only is immigration reform the most humane thing to do, it will help to buttress the Social Security and the Medicare and Medicaid systems. We need to do it immediately.
Absolutely, the immigration system is totally broken. It's totally broken. And if you stop and think, this is one of the primary issues of the times. That's why you're hearing so much in the Republican debates. And we as Democrats must also have the kind of enlightened immigration policy that we are desperately fighting for. I've been fighting for immigration reform. As a matter of fact, it's only at the federal level that we can change immigration laws. And that is one of the reasons why I want to be there. And I'm going to be there with a team. I have 26 colleagues from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus who have endorsed me, who are going to be there fighting with me. I have a record. I was arrested 4 times. Fighting immigration reform. I've actually written federal bills that would change the laws for TPS holders. I'm from El Salvador. 214,000 Salvadorans are waiting for a permanent resident. Yes, this is a must, and it must be done now.
I want to start by saying I'm proud of Ansel Gutierrez and the Democrats on this panel. We are uniform in standing up for the rights of immigrants, and when you see the things that are coming out of the mouths of the people running for president on the Republican side, it's absolutely appalling. To be bashing immigrants, to be denying the meaning of America, which is embodied so much in the Statue of Liberty. This is a country of opportunity where people come to be able to make a future and to be part of free markets and civil rights and civil liberties. So I was proud to have fought for the DREAM Act, which we passed in Maryland. Very proud of it. We definitely need to revise America's immigration system to make millions of people who are here, to make it possible for them to get on a realistic, plausible pathway to citizenship. We need them to strengthen America. We need them to help deal with the solvency of the Social Security system. And we've got to stop the divisions that are following because of the immigration crisis.
Donald Trump talk about this big wall with the red carpet and the big door. I am proud to be a Democrat. Immigration and the failure to create comprehensive immigration reform, I think, is one of the major frustrations that many of us face in terms of this Congress. This is an issue on which labor and business agree, and there aren't many issues that you find like that. We should be able to take that consensus and actually advance reform in the next Congress. And I would want to be very much a part of that. In the same way that I worked on behalf of the travel industry, actually getting President Obama to articulate a national tourism strategy and find Democrats in Congress who would advance visa reform and other ways that we created new jobs during the global economic downturn I believe that we could, and we got Republicans to work on that, to get it passed, because in a Republican-controlled Congress, you need Republicans to get it passed. I believe we could also do the same in this next Congress with immigration reform.
Thank you. I would agree with much of what's been said. When you listen to Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, even though he says it a little more smooth than other people, they are denying the basic premise of America, that people came here to seek opportunity for themselves and for their families. It's what my dad did. My dad was a Nigerian immigrant who came here on the heels of the Biafran War in his country to a small town in Kansas where he met my mom. And they moved here to this area, which has been so welcoming to so many immigrants. How many people are happy about the great diversity that we have in this community? Raise your hand. I know I am. It's something that is denied by many of these Republican candidates, and I'm glad all of us stand in agreement on that. I worked in the Senate in 2007 with Senator Kennedy at the helm, when we almost passed immigration reform. Kathleen is right. Business, labor, it's the right thing for our country. It's the right thing for our country personally. It's the right thing professionally. It's the right thing to do because it's the humane thing to do, and it's going to strengthen us going forward, and I can get that done in Congress. Thank you.
Thank God for immigration. If it wasn't for immigration, I wouldn't be here. Probably most of this audience wouldn't be here. Certainly my wife, her mother wouldn't be here. We would not have the country we have today. But to get it done in Congress, in hostile territory, it takes a real strategy. But when Secretary Kerry asked me to organize the House of Representatives to support the Iran deal, which I did, and we won, it was in hostile territory. It can be done. One needs to find coalition partners that are different, validators, and key advocates on the outside. And I believe that that is an imperative, that the Republicans are in the minority. We just have to make sure that the public sees that and puts the pressure on them, and it can be done. Thank you.
Well, now we're on a subject close to home, so I can introduce my wife, Adrienne, who is an immigration attorney. She runs the law firm out of my living room, so I feel very close to these issues and to the people who come to our house. There's 840,000 immigrants in Maryland. If we sent all the immigrants back from Maryland, we'd lose $15 billion, and we're not going to send them back. The truth is that immigrants are excellent from the standpoint of production and excellent from the standpoint of consumption. Now, obviously, we have to have a path to citizenship, and we need to tighten the borders so that not everyone can come in. But we especially want to let the vulnerable ones come in. I see the vulnerable ones in my living room, the young women who've been raped, and my wife and the interpreter get their stories. So there has to be a middle ground. And the quick answer to the question is, how do you work with the Republicans? You can't be on the left wing of the Democratic Party. You have to be center-left to be able to talk to issues that will be in the middle. And that's where I'm coming from, center-left.
Thank you. We'll start the next question with Delegate Soldier-Harris. With more than a dozen federal agencies located in Montgomery County, mandatory spending cuts and government shutdowns hit very close to home in Congressional District 8. As a minority member of Congress, what would be your budget priorities keeping the voters of District 8 in mind?
I have been very fortunate to serve on the board of an organization called Will Wan. It's a group of feisty women legislators that have been working for many years to focus on Pentagon spending. Every year, we analyze where is the spending going. And we have seen that discretionary spending, that spending that affects all of us, our lives, education, health, everything that is coming to the states, everything that is making the quality of life for us better has been cut. Yet, there is a slush fund that is on the side that is being used to pay for all of these military interventions. Our recommendation is that we really look at where the spending is going in the Pentagon and get rid of those projects. That will free up the money for all of our priorities for social spending. Thank you.
So number one priority, keep the government open. It costs tens of millions of dollars just to plan for these ludicrous Republican shutdowns, and just to plan for them. And we know how much it cost our economy the last time they did it. Number two, defend science. We are funding the NIH and the National Cancer Institute and the greatest scientific establishments in the country. We're having an event in our campaign where we're just going to be defending science against the climate change deniers who are putting the civilization at risk, the people who want to shut down embryonic cell research, and the people that want to defund science in America. And number three, I was named the most responsive elected official in Montgomery County by the Silver Spring Voice, and I will go to bat for the small businesses who are being written out of contracting potential by the big businesses. We've got to make sure there's room for the small businesses to compete fairly to get federal contracts.
With NIH and the FDA and 20% of the workforce in the federal workforce here in the 8th Congressional District, this area has had a disproportionate burden of the sequester and the federal budget cuts that we've seen under the Republican Congress. And so, number one, I think that we have to restore funding for those institutions like NIH, which today has 25% less in real dollars to spend on 21st century cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, HIV/AIDS. So that's number one. Number two is we've got to stop playing political football with federal employees and their wages. They have lost ground over the last decade on federal wages. So restoring sanity there. And finally, our seniors, we got to make sure that we protect Social Security, we make it solvent for future generations, we don't raise the age on Social Security, and we make sure that there is retirement security for everyone in America today and going forward.
Thank you, Dr.
Getting good at that. Okay, priorities. So here's the Republican argument. Let's defund and cut government enough so that people think that it won't work when we don't fund it to do what it's supposed to do. Think about that. I was on the Hill, I've been on the sequester, Michelle and I both work in the federal government. We've had the furlough days, I'm sure there's some people in here who have had those as well. That ideology is something we have to push back in, messaging-wise, also to tell that story, because that's what they do. And that has real-life consequences, some of which you've heard. 80,000 or more government workers in District 8, we have to protect and defend their right to go to work. We have to invest in innovation across the board. I was proud to work with the Department of Education, where we passed some things called the Investing in Innovation Program, which invested in disruptive change. That's in climate, that's in education, that's in science and technology. We need disruptive, innovative change if we're going to solve the problems of tomorrow. We also have to make sure that we get another stimulus, because if we're going to roll back the effects of the sequester, we're going to need another stimulus. There's a lot of people still out of work, particularly people of color and low-income folks. Thank you very much.
So the first time I experienced a government shutdown was as a Peace Corps volunteer back in 1995, and we were cut off, and we were afraid we were going to get cut off out in the field on our own. I went into the government after that, when we survived it, but I went to the government after that. I was a civil servant for 7 years. And the insecurity of not knowing whether or not the government's going to stay open, that's real, and it has a real depressing impact on our local economy. We need to find a way to ensure that does not happen again. I want to echo that. Civil servants are not supposed to be a political football. They serve our country, and we need to protect it. But in addition to that, We need to make sure that the taxes are being paid at a fair level, that the wealthy are paying their fair share. We don't have much more to cut. There is really, this federal government is really at the bare bones. We all know it, we see it, the system is stressed, we live it. And when I'm in Congress, we'll fight to raise that revenue.
We need to increase the funding of NIH from $30 billion to $40 billion. We need to increase the monthly payments of those 36% of seniors who basically live on Social Security at $70 a month, and the majority of those seniors are women and minorities. But the main thing, of course, that I think we need to do is provide about $100 billion for a national family policy. But let me explain. If you just argue for paid leave and child care, you're not going to get it. So that's what Ms. Matthews argues for. If you offer the tax credit, legislatively, if you offer the tax credit to the Republicans, that is close to their heart. So Democrats who tell you that we're going to get paid leave and child care are telling you something that's not going to happen with Paul Ryan as Speaker. I'm telling you the truth. You got to go to them with something they want. They want tax credits for stay-at-home moms and dads. You give them that, you'll get your paid leave and you'll get your child care. It's not fair to just have child care for child care centers. You got to pay a mom or a dad the same amount of money you pay a center.
Kathleen, you were mentioned. Would you like to rebut?
Can I hold on to that 30 seconds?
That's above my pay grade.
If you give the 30 seconds to me, I'll defend her. The two priorities have to be, number one, research and development, and number two, infrastructure, which means the NIH and the red line that it sits on. Now, let me tell you about something specific I've done in Maryland that goes to how we can turn research and development specifically into jobs. I was the author of an organization called TEDCO, the Technology Development Corporation. It is a quasi-independent organization that takes scientists from our laboratories, from our universities, gets them mentoring, gets them early stage capital, and turns their ideas into jobs. In 2013 alone, TEDCO and its spin-off companies created 2,500 jobs, averaging $70,700 a year. This is an example of turning research and development into real jobs with real benefits and a real future for our people.
Thank you. We will start the next question with Senator Raskin. What is the most significant environmental issue?
Hold on. I need you to stand up here for it. Problem solved.
All right. Our next question. What is the most significant environmental issue facing the United States, and what would you propose to do to address it?
Well, of course, it's the same issue that's confronting the rest of the world, but I don't describe it as an issue, Kate. I think that climate change and global warming are the entire context within which we've got to make every other decision. And what we're seeing is water wars and oil wars breaking out all over the world, and the nightmare from Syria with millions of people fleeing that country could be a foreshadowing of what we could anticipate with millions or tens of millions of climate refugees trying to get into the northern countries if we don't deal with it seriously. And then it's not just going to be Donald Trump talking about building a wall. So we need to get on top of this quickly. It was a nightmarish summer, 300,000 acres of wildfire in Alaska, 150,000 in California. Congressman Chris Van Hollen has got the right approach. He's introduced something that's called the cap and dividend proposal, which declares essentially the American people own the sky, and we will charge the carbon industries, coal and gas and oil to use it. Will David attack me again, please? We're old friends.
Successful in creating an economy with works for all people, not just people at the top. If we're successful in creating safer communities, none of this will matter if we are burning up our planet. We need to protect this planet for future generations. And we need to make that incredible shift from what's been a fossil fuel, climate changing, creating energy economy into a clean energy economy. So we need incentives to do that. We need a carbon tax on polluters that will wean us off the coal and the petroleum and the natural gas and shift us into wind, solar, and innovation that we haven't even thought about. But you need the money to invest in this innovation. President Obama will be in Paris shortly. He is leading because he has a green power plan. He's got actually some credibility now going into those talks. And I think he's going to make a difference. I think he's going to get the other economies to work with us because this is a global problem. It's not something the U.S. alone can solve.
Persistent. Biggest environmental issue. Okay. So we have to invest in renewable energy. It's ridiculous. I work for Sherrod Brown, senator from Ohio, coal state. I told him the same thing. He hasn't moved as quickly as I'd like in some cases. We have to invest in renewables. The reason we need to is because it's going to unlock a whole new green economy. It's going to have people that are low income on a scale, the ability to learn these new technologies and solar. Who's seen the solar city signs popping up around? I know I've in my neighborhood. They save people money. The credits are there. We have to move to that rapidly, and the president started that process, and I'm glad he's moving towards it. The other thing is that this issue affects everything else. Security. In Nigeria, Boko Haram, which is on the terrorists, it's blowing up things in Nigeria. They have been able to thrive because of the severe droughts that have happened in that country, and that's happening across the globe. So that's why Secretary of State Kerry and others have said that this isn't just an environmental issue, it's a national security issue. It's an issue for our economy. It's an issue for all those reasons. And I want my daughters and my granddaughters to have some place to live. Thank you very much.
I've seen the challenge of environmental degradation and economic development up close and personal. When I was in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica, I was an environmental volunteer. And I worked every day with communities on tree planting, on organic agriculture with women's groups to help them figure out how to move to market products that they would not deforest. I also ran a solar program at the Energy Department for 2 years, a national program looking to clean up brownfield sites through the use of solar. We need innovation, but we need a Congress that supports these programs. These programs are net winners across the board. The American people love them. The American people want to ensure that we have a strong, safe, healthy environment. It's not a partisan issue, but the Republicans are blocking it, and I'll know how to fight them to make sure that we do protect our environment.
Well, global warming is obviously the critical challenge. It's best to think of it in terms of dirty energy and clean energy. So the experts say we're at 400 parts per million now of carbon, and we're supposed to be at 350. And they say it would take until 2100 if we worked really hard to bring it down. So it's good to have a number in mind. We should have a carbon tax, cap and trade. Lots of experts are throwing that out. So we have to have some way to tax the people who are polluting. So that's the dirty part. The other part of this is the clean energy, right? Because even if you eliminate that pollution, you still have to work on positive, constructive ways for energy. So there we have renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar, and we should be trying to have 50% of our energy coming from clean energy by 2030.
Thank you. Senator Gardner.
So Kumar, how are you different from everybody I keep hearing? Let me list 4 things specifically that I've done and why it's significant. First of all, very shortly, 20% of the electrons flowing out of your wall socket have to be renewable energy because I was able to convince Governor Ehrlich that it was good public policy, a Republican. Number two, every building built in Maryland has to be 30% more fuel efficient from the get-go when it's cheap to do it. Number three, we do have incentives for offshore wind. Number four, I was the author of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act of 2009, the toughest law of its kind in the United States. And of course I supported the Clean Cars Act and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative as majority leader. But the reason the advocates chose me and the reason the speaker chose me is, Kumar, you're an accountant. You are the chief financial officer of an environmental company in Rockville, Maryland. You can explain the math and the business model of environmental science better than anybody else.
Thank you very much, and of course, I agree that climate change, global change, is the number one significant issue of our environment. And I'm very proud that in Maryland we have been doing quite aggressive manners to provide alternative fuels, alternative solutions. But you know, my concern is that this is indeed a global crisis. We must think much bigger than in our own backyard. We must think beyond just our state, and we must think beyond our nation. We see what global warming is doing to especially in poor nations. Poverty, famine, lack of water. Those are critical issues to me that we also must be addressing. We must be addressing it because in the end, it is about our planet, and we all do things.
Should we start our next question with Kathy?
I don't know, I think this one, we've achieved consensus.
All right. The race for the Democratic nomination in Congressional District 8 is expected to be the most expensive in the district's history. How would you propose to address campaign finance reform in light of the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, and how is that reflected in your campaign fundraising?
Citizens United was one of the worst decisions that's come recently from our U.S. Supreme Court because it put big polluted money into our races, and it also created an uneven playing field in terms of all of us who have a right to vote and to express our political opinion. So, first of all, we need to be approaching a constitutional amendment to repeal Citizens United. We need to make sure that we elect Hillary Clinton as our next president of the United States. That we appoint the right Supreme Court justices and the right members of the U.S. Senate so that we can overturn it if we don't get the constitutional amendment, which is very difficult to do, done by that time. In my campaign, I am reaching out broadly in Maryland, broadly in the 8th Congressional District, to everybody. I want everybody to support my campaign. And so I am reaching back to friends, family members, people who've known me for 25 years on the air and who work with me at Marriott International, and to all of you who I would like to support my campaign for Congress.
Thank you. Citizens United has to be overturned. It's the most insidious decision in probably a generation, and there's been a lot of bad ones. The fact that I and my colleagues have to spend 5, 6, 7 hours a day on the phone calling people for money, as opposed to being at forums like this talking to you about issues, is what's wrong with our system. The only way we're going to get it done, which is equally as important about it, we all agree that it's bad, is flipping this Congress back to the Democratic control. We're going to need someone who can go in there with a vision and inspire and build a coalition that can take over these 30-plus seats that we need to get the House back in Democratic control. That's the only way to overturn Citizens United. You need to put someone in there who has that vision, who has that energy, so that can get that done over time, and I'm that candidate. Thank you.
the newest candidate in the race, I have to say it is really shocking how much time they have to spend fundraising. I've spent nearly 20 years working in public service and advocacy, fighting for policies, making change with my colleagues and peers, and it works, it can be done. Running for Congress is public service, and we need to make sure that our people who are elected have the chance to really engage everybody in the community and delve into the issues. It is distorting our ability to make good decisions. It's distorting our political system. It's shifting decisions to a very narrow elite, and it's leaving the rest of us behind. And we do need to repeal Citizens United as a start, but we need to go further. We need to make sure that this political process belongs to the people, not to the very wealthy few.
Well, this is a sensitive issue. I certainly think we should overturn Citizens United. But I want to tell you, as a first-time candidate, that it's hard to run against candidates who have lots of money and friends with lots of money, okay? I have a PhD in philosophy from the University of Michigan. I was studying these issues, and especially family policy, in the 1980s. I wrote a dissertation about gender development, women's oppression, why there should be shared parenting. By 1990, I was working with feminist activists like Betty Friedan, who quoted me in her book, Beyond Gender. By 2000, I realized that we were being unfair to stay-at-home parents. I put in a tax credit for stay-at-home parents. In my latest book, I argued that women are over-leveraged, and I'm finding it difficult to get my message out. I'm a real family man. I have a wife, a daughter, a stepson. Raising the money to communicate is very challenging, but I am the real family candidate. 30 years I've been working on family policy. Thank you.
Well, you know, I have a degree in accounting from Georgetown University, and it's hard for me too, so there. You know, it really isn't a joke in this sense. If we don't have a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, we will convert from being a democracy into an oligarchy. And an oligarchy made up of a number of people who could fit on one jumbo jet. This is serious, and it's not serious simply because it makes life difficult for me and my colleagues here. I hope it's making it difficult for you as it is for me. But the point of the matter is that it really is you that we should be focusing on. You need to communicate at every opportunity that you have to talk to people who don't agree with us, that the stakes are simple. Democracy versus oligarchy. I choose democracy, and that's why we have to elect a Democratic president and a Democrat majority Senate.
Absolutely, we must end Citizens United and the power of money. The incredible power of money. We see it every day in every one of our debates, of the national debates. And we're seeing it right here in our own campaigns. It is very, very frustrating. I can tell you, I'm a policy wonk. I want to have thoughts. I want to have discussions. I want to engage with the democratic process. And yet when we have to be there raising money to run a campaign, I think we've distorted what is the true sense of a democratic process. We must change this. We must support publicly funded elections. That is a response that we must all make. And that is what we're going to balance. These are the proposals. We are going to pass it. Because that is the only way we're going to be free to really engage, to have a level playing field. Thank you. I always said it.
I want to invoke our last great Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And this is the promise of America that has been trampled by the Supreme Court in Citizens United and allied cases like that. In my campaign, 80% or less, 80% of our contributors have given us $100 or less. 80%. And I am proud to say, that we have more individual donors than any congressional campaign in America does not an incumbent. More than 5,000 people are donors. We have more than 75 events, backyard barbecues, we're in people's living rooms. Last night, we had an event on gun violence in America, what can be done, and more than 200 people came out for that. So I think the only thing I disagree with that I've heard is I don't spend 5 or 6 or 7 hours a day raising money on the telephone. I do it 1 hour, and my staff will tell you I don't even do 1 hour because I do think it's a diversion from what we've got to be doing. This has got to be a campaign of substance and ideas.
Thank you. We're going to have a 30-second rebuttal from Mr. Johnson.
I got one.
Who said his name? Who said his name?
What?
His
You mentioned me on the 5, 6, 7 hours.
Oh, I thought
That's not how it works. The one thing I will add on this, in my 30 seconds, is that the other thing that this does is it lowers the number of women, people of color in Congress, because people with the same access to the same networks, from the same schools that have access to wealth and privilege in this country are the people. I'm glad that people can raise money easier than some than others, and we've done pretty well. We came in third last time, raising $164,000. But the problem is, when you have that access and you put the same people in Congress, it perpetuates the system.
Thank you.
And we can't let that happen.
Our next question, we will start with Mr. Delongo. What do you uniquely bring to Congress, or what have you accomplished in your professional or legislative career that demonstrates what you would do for the residents of Congressional District 8 if elected?
Thank you for the question. I think that's the core issue in this campaign. How are we unique? What do we bring to the table? I have the combination of personal and professional experience that is desperately needed in Congress right now. I grew up very low income in Silver Spring. When I was 12 years old, I lost my best friend to gun violence, an issue that's been mentioned a couple of times, but not enough. I know in a personal way that but for the scholarships and the benefactor that I had in my mom's hard work, that I wouldn't have made it. And that's the story for all too many Americans in this country, and it's a story that's underrepresented in Congress. You combine that with my experience at the federal level, 6 years on the Hill, 2 years at the White House, 2 years at the Department of Education. I am a bridge builder. I can talk to the kid in Long Branch who grew up like me. I can talk to Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid on the floor of the House and the Senate like I've done, and everyone in between. And that's what we need right now, desperately in the Congress. And that's what I'll bring to get real things done for real working families. And I hope I can give me that opportunity.
Thank you. What I bring to this race and what I truly believe is needed in Congress is someone who can make change, not just against Republicans, but also against Democrats if need be. I helped to start an organization 7 years ago called J Street, which promotes Middle East peace. I helped start that because the politics on the Middle East were not open, and we changed that debate. We opened it up. I then led the campaign to support diplomacy with Iran at the Plowshares Fund as an outside advocate. Plaza. That, I will tell you, that was the key missing ingredient in getting this deal done. When Secretary Kerry asked me to join the State Department, I helped us win that deal in Congress. We need people who understand how to work with advocates, how to make change, and how to take the tough fights to Congress. Not just the winnable ones, but to work on the fights that are the right ones, and to work overtime to make them happen. Thank you.
Well, as I've already told you, I'm not an establishment candidate. I am not a party line Democrat. I think outside the box. I'm a creative problem solver. I told you I spent 30 years working on family policy, and by the time I was 40, I realized that what I was arguing when I was 30 was at that point outdated. And those are the things that people on this panel are arguing for today. Now I'm 56 and I'm a hybrid candidate. I've taught at 6 universities. I have 3 books to my name. I've got 50 or so op-eds, more than half in the Baltimore Sun. and in the Gazette. But I spent the last 13 years working in practical politics. I have worked in 20 states, raising millions of dollars. I have worked with Democrats and Republicans, governors, state senators, state representatives in Maryland, in Florida, in Mississippi, in Illinois. I've worked with all constellations, all Democrats, all Republicans. I know how to work with Republicans. I can also say thank you in over 30 languages. I'm good on people skills. Thank you.
Shukriya. Show of hands, how many people here believe we ought to close corporate tax loopholes? Put them up there. Okay, how many people here believe we ought to ban fracking? Put them up there. Okay, I'm a liberal accountant. I'm an accountant, I have a background in business. I used my skills as an accountant to pass bipartisan loophole closings to the tune of $200 million a year, and we used that money to freeze tuition at the University of Maryland for 4 years. And fracking is something that people struggled with for 5-6 years. This last January, I became the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee, and I and my committee got it done inside of 90 days. And it was a strong bipartisan result. Listen, people, I will tell you that anybody can read off a list of talking points. Very few people can put together an understanding of the economics of liberal progressive policy and then explain it to people throughout the spectrum. That's what makes me different.
Thank you very much. Well, what makes me different is what you're seeing. I am a woman. I am an immigrant. I am a fighter. I have been fighting most of my life to prepare for this opportunity, to bring to us here in Montgomery County the kind of voice that we need at the federal level. I believe that the time has come to change. Our demographics have already told us what direction this country is moving in. I think we need to change who is speaking. What is the voice that is going to lead to the future? Who's going to know where the direction is that we need to go in this country, and in a manner that is respectful, that has the dignity of every human being, that is inclusive. I want to be there as an immigrant with my face to tell the Tea Party that they are headed in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everybody here said that they want to reverse Citizens United. Last summer, the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee had hearings, and they invited one academic expert in the country to come testify about reversing Citizens United, and that was me. I've written a book on it. I've written a series of the essays you can find at the People for the American Way website. So I'm a professor of constitutional law, and I bring more than 2 decades of experience writing and analyzing these issues. Secondly, I'm a middle child. Okay? And this is what makes me an effective progressive. Okay? I brought together huge bipartisan coalitions to pass marriage equality, to pass the Second Chance Act, to abolish the death penalty. When I heard that you couldn't get wine shipped to your door in Maryland, and I couldn't believe that because of the monopoly power of the liquor industry, I brought together Republicans, Democrats, progressives, libertarian conservatives, farmers, and we passed direct wine shipment in the state of Maryland.
To be effective, I think, in Congress, you have to be an effective communicator. And this is what I have spent my first career doing as a journalist. Communicating the problems, the concerns, the hopes, the triumphs and tragedies of all of you, the people who live here in the Washington area. Telling your stories as a way to illuminate the pathway forward and where we need to go as a community and as a country. So effective communication is number 1, I think. Number 2 is coalition and consensus building. I work for Marriott International for 9 years. A very good employer, a good company, creating a lot of economic growth, but a pretty conservative environment. Within that environment, as an agitator and a progressive, I argued that we needed to be more inclusive of the LGBTQ community in that company. We needed to be outspoken about it. And by the time I left, I had the company signing every amicus brief across the country for marriage equality. One woman, me, reporting to the CEO. Every time there was an opportunity, I argued for more. When I left, there were 3. Thank you. We moved the number of women on the board from 2 to 4. That's effectiveness, and that's coalition building.
Our first audience question will start with Mr. Rubin. Do we want to pass that mic on down?